The crack of naval artillery split the dawn over Ciotat on August 17, 1944. German officers recoiled as their radio channels erupted with a storm of intercepted signals and phantom transmissions. Through the morning haze, strange shapes materialized above the French coast, reflector balloons casting metallic shadows of phantom ships across their radar screens. The bombardment intensified, each explosion rattling windows and sending tremors through the port city's ancient stones. Soldiers manning the coastal guns swiveled their weapons from target to target, finding only ghosts in the fog. As orders and counter-orders ricocheted through the German chain of command, some units broke for the hills to counter a paratrooper assault that wasn't there, while others dug in for a naval invasion that seemed to come from every direction at once. In the chaos and confusion of that August morning, the defenders of Ciotat had become unwitting targets of one of the most audacious acts of military misdirection in the Mediterranean theater. The feint. On the early morning of August 17, 1944, Allied forces prepared for a bold feint against the French Mediterranean port city of Ciotat. It was a key diversion in the grand Operation Dragoon. This operation aimed to split the German defenses and open the way for an Allied second front in Vichy, France. For the task, the Allied command summoned Captain John D. Bulkeley, a fierce and seasoned strategist known for his gutsy maneuvers. Bulkeley led a small but potent strike force, USS Endicott, a formidable Gleaves-class destroyer armed with heavy 5-inch dual-purpose guns. Following the destroyer were 17 sleek American patrol torpedo, or PT boats, armed for close encounters, as well as 2 of Britain's tough insect-class gunboats, HMS Scarab and HMS Aphis, outfitted with large 6-inch naval guns. Together, they would charge headlong toward Ciotat to pull German attention away from the critical landings at Cavalier-sur-Mer, Saint-Tropez, and San Rafael, leaving those beaches more vulnerable to the main Allied assault. The taking of these Mediterranean port cities was meant to complement the wider goals of the D-Day invasion at Normandy. Earlier that day, before daybreak, a squadron of American aircraft soared over the hills north of Ciotat. This was another part of the larger deception for Operation Dragoon, executing a daring ruse to confuse the German forces. One by one, they released 300 burlap dummies, each stuffed to resemble paratroopers in midair. As the figures floated down, the pilots dropped explosive charges, creating bursts of noise that mimicked rifle fire. Below, the Germans were thrown into panic, believing they were witnessing a full-scale airborne assault. Officers scrambled to deploy reinforcements, their minds racing as the sound of quote-unquote gunfire echoed through the hills. For hours, the Germans were paralyzed, unable to tell if this was a real threat or a clever trick. By the end of the day, the Allies had achieved their goal, leaving the Germans uncertain and disoriented as another invasion was about to unfold further south. Back off the coast of Ciotat, the Allied ships formed into attack lines. An eerie calm settled over the waters, broken only by the steady thrum of engines. They surged forward under low morning light, each vessel's crew primed, awaiting the order to unleash a fierce barrage on the German defensive forces at Ciotat. The dawn's early fight. As the first light crept over the horizon, the Allied flotilla positioned itself just off Ciotat, engines rumbling as the fleet tightened into formation. Captain Bulkeley directed his PT boats and British gunboats forward, leaving the larger USS Endicott behind to command the rear. In silence, the vessels darted toward the port, sleek and dark against the dawn, with engines throttled low to maintain stealth. A lone German merchant steamer lay in wait. Then, with a flash, the Allied boats unleashed a sudden barrage. Shells and machine gun fire ripped across the harbor, targeting the large steamer. Within moments, the German vessel erupted in flames, listing to one side before it began sinking into the smoke-shrouded water. At precisely 5:45 a.m., Bulkeley signaled to cease fire, and Endicott surged forward, pushing south alongside the PT boats. Meanwhile, British gunboats HMS Aphis and HMS Scarab dropped back, releasing thick plumes of smoke that expanded across the water's surface, veiling the Allied retreat. The smoke, dense and impenetrable, shielded the strike force from potential shore-based retaliations, allowing them to slip away into the fading night. The Allies' swift strike effectively neutralized any German merchant raiders, preventing them from disrupting the upcoming southern France invasion. By eliminating this threat, the Allies secured vital maritime routes and ensured that enemy forces couldn't interfere with the landing operations. But the brief excitement of a first victory was cut short. Captain Bulkley's radio crackled to life with a jarring message. ARB-21, the small American air-sea rescue boat running alongside the British gunboats, was under attack. Bulkley strained to catch the details as the message cut in and out. 2 German vessels, formerly an Italian Gabbiano-class corvette, now renamed UJ-6082, and former Egyptian armed yacht Nimet Allah, were bearing down on them. UJ-6082, outfitted with a menacing 100mm gun and torpedo tubes, bristled with enough firepower to take on much larger targets. The yacht mounted an 88mm German flak gun, capable of devastating both aircraft and armored boats with terrifying accuracy. On the British gunboats, chaos erupted. HMS Aphis and HMS Scarab were built for riverine support, not high seas combat. Their 6-inch guns, relics of the 1890s, could only lumber through the air compared to the German rounds, but the British crews fought with every ounce of tenacity they had. Gunners loaded shell after shell, sending rounds arcing toward the approaching German vessels. Explosions burst across the water, but it was clear. Their weaponry, slow and underpowered, couldn't match the sheer velocity and range of the German guns. UJ-6082 let loose a thunderous round, a 100mm shell screaming toward the British boats, and it landed dangerously close to HMS Scarab. The impact rocked the gunboat, sending a spray of salt water over the deck and leaving the crew scrambling to regain their balance. Then Nimet Allah's 88mm gun opened up, her fire precise and brutal. Shells whizzed by, one exploding near the bow of HMS Aphis, sending shrapnel pinging off the armor, and the crew dropped to the deck, shielding themselves. The situation was desperate. The British gunners kept firing, knowing each shell they sent out was a slight chance at survival, though each round grew harder to land. They couldn't risk taking a direct hit, not with these antique guns against the German superior weaponry. The Allies couldn't afford to lose either of these gunboats. They were essential to the diversions that kept German forces off balance. If these enemy raiders broke through and made it back to Marseille, they would disrupt the waves of Allied supply ships essential for the invasion of France. Bulkley ordered an emergency retreat. The British gunboats fired off a few more rounds before throttling back and withdrawing, their engines roaring as they struggled to escape the relentless fire. UJ-6082 and Nimet Allah kept up the chase, the former's 100mm gun flashing with deadly precision, but the smoke from HMS Scarab and Aphis formed a protective shroud. It was their only cover as they pushed their engines to the limits, praying the haze would hide them long enough to get clear. As the radio crackled with news of the beleaguered British gunboats under attack, Captain Bulkley didn't hesitate. He ordered USS Endicott to swing northwest, her engines roaring as she rushed to engage the German attackers. The Wrath of the Endicott. It was a fog-choked morning, shrouding the Mediterranean in a thick mist that limited visibility to mere hundreds of yards. But just ahead, through the swirling fog, flashes of red erupted across the horizon at 6:20 a.m. The German vessels were firing their guns, lighting up the dawn in sporadic bursts. Endicott's crew scrambled to ready their guns, but a grim realization settled over them. Only one of their 5-inch guns was operational. The rest were jammed, locked in place by overheated breech blocks that had swollen from relentless shore bombardments earlier. Bulkley didn't let that stop him. With a single operational gun, the Endicott opened fire from within 1,500 yards, its booming shots reverberating through the mist. Seeing the new threat, the Germans shifted their fire from the British gunboats to the incoming Endicott. Cannon shells and machine gun rounds whizzed past, striking the sea around her, sending great columns of water skyward as the destroyer zigzagged, her hull slicing through the choppy waves. Endicott pressed forward, closing the distance even as German fire intensified. At last, a round hit its mark. Bulkley's gunners scored 2 solid hits on Naval, the German yacht's engine room bursting into flames, thick black smoke pouring from below decks. The yacht, now crippled, slowed to a crawl, but her crew kept firing, determined to return every shot. Meanwhile, 2 PT boats surged forward to support Endicott, darting through the waves toward the larger German vessels. Both launched torpedoes in rapid succession, aimed squarely at the enemy hulls. Yet, as the PT boats got closer in, German machine gunners zeroed in, raking the decks with precise, brutal fire. The PT boats had to veer off, retreating under a hail of bullets, leaving Endicott alone to face the German onslaught. Endicott's crew fought to revive the jammed guns, cooling them carefully to avoid further swelling. One by one, the guns came back into operation, but the crew had to fire cautiously, unable to unleash the full arsenal for fear of jamming again. Just then, the German ship Antelope retaliated with 2 torpedoes, slicing through the water toward Endicott. Bulkley ordered a sharp turn. The destroyer veered hard, narrowly dodging both torpedoes, which sped past into the darkness. Then, a thunderous crash rocked Endicott as a German shell slammed into her side, shaking the entire ship. For a second, everyone held their breath. Luckily, the shell was a dud, failing to detonate. Though it punched a small hole in the hull, the damage was minimal. The impact caused small fires to flare up, but they were quickly extinguished by the alert crew. When the smoke cleared, the crew beheld one grim casualty. A single sailor would never be going home. In a swift counterattack, Endicott launched her own torpedoes back at the Antelope, which now had to maneuver hard to avoid them. The 2 ships faced each other in a tense standoff, but only Endicott's guns were functional at close range. The Antelope's high bow blocked her own main gun's line of sight, leaving her vulnerable. Taking full advantage, Endicott unleashed everything she had: 5-inch shells, 20mm rounds, and 40mm bursts, all raining down on the Antelope in a blistering stream of firepower. As the skirmish reached its peak, Naval continued to take damage, her hull breached and taking on water fast. Listing dangerously to one side, the German yacht began to sink, her crew scrambling in panic to abandon ship as the cold waters of the Mediterranean surged in. Meanwhile, flames licked across the Antelope's deck, smoke billowing as Endicott pressed the attack. With a final repositioning maneuver, the American destroyer opened fire with every available gun, sending a cascade of shells ripping across Antelope's bow, tearing through her hull. Explosions erupted from within as the rounds penetrated deeper and the German corvette began to disintegrate. Her crew had no choice but to abandon her, scrambling overboard as the ship was consumed by fire and sinking debris. For nearly an hour, USS Endicott and her small flotilla dueled at close range with the German corvette UJ-6082 and the armed yacht Naval. Flashes of cannon fire illuminated the fog-shrouded waters as both sides fought fiercely, shells bursting through the air and metal clanging with every impact. In the end, American fire proved relentless. By the final minutes, the corvette and the yacht both lay sinking, their hulls slipping below the waves as flames flickered out on the misty surface. With her enemies defeated, Endicott held her position for a moment, surveying the smoking remains of the German vessels. Bulkley gave the order to cease fire, and the surviving Allied boats regrouped, engines droning as they headed back through the dissipating fog, victorious against the odds. A critical confusion. The fight had been brief but decisive, ending by 7:17 a.m. Endicott's superstructure bore scars from raking machine gun fire and shell fragments, but the ship itself remained fully operational. With the enemy destroyed and the threat neutralized, the Americans began retrieving German survivors, hoping they might reveal the presence of other enemy vessels in the area. German casualties remained unknown, but the Allies captured 169 prisoners aboard Endicott and 41 more on the British gunboats, all at the cost of only one American sailor. With the waters cleared of threat, the Allies resumed their bombardment of Ciotat, pressing forward in their broader assault on southern France. The Battle of Ciotat was more than just a naval engagement. It was a key psychological maneuver within the larger framework of Operation Dragoon. The Allies' feint attack on Ciotat successfully diverted German attention from the real landings at Cavaleres-sur-Mer and Saint-Tropez. By confusing and destabilizing the enemy, the Allies bought valuable time and resources, ensuring the success of Operation Dragoon. It was a critical victory of strategy and deception.